everybody. I appreciate it. We all know our town manager, Karina. And again,
I do not know our town manager. Hello.
okay, Alex, pleased to meet you. Heard a lot of good things. Vino, how are you?
Aces, thank you, sir.
Vino's down in Florida, by the way. That's why he couldn't be here in person. So the weather's better up here than it is in Florida.
I am well. Thank you very much. Glad to join you.
All right, glad to have you. And thank you for the email and all of the sites. Hopefully, everybody received that, you were able to log on to some sites that the state and the feds talk about housing and initiatives and possible funding. So Kayla, at the last meeting indicated that she was going to have an investor come and speak to us. And his schedule changed a little bit, but that's Alex up there to my right. And Kayla, why don't you introduce Alex and let him start talking?
All right, so hi, everybody. So on the screen with us, I'm joined by a colleague of mine who I hold in pretty high regards, Alex Talcott. And Alex is, I'll sort of give you my spiel on Alex, which is that Alex is sort of a guy who wears many hats around the state, but he's a New Hampshire resident who's a teacher at UNH, but he also, more than that, has a real interest in real estate investing across the country. And he's been trying to put it to use in his quote unquote backyard, right, in New Hampshire more and more. And so one of the things that I was hoping Alex is going to be able to sort of talk with us all about is how to fund this sort of thing and how it comes together and like what could work well, because at the end of the day, what ends up having to happen is we have to figure out kind of, if we're going to pursue a project together, what are we going to cobble together with money? Where are we going to try and get it done? And who's the team that's really at play here? And Alex is a guy who's pretty good at putting those together, but he knows an unbelievable amount about finance. And with that, I'll say, Alex, if you want to just say a quick hello and maybe do a little more formal spiel on who you are and less the way Kayla sees you.
No, that works. And Kelly, I love that you pronounced spiel correctly. As a native New Yorker, that Yiddish was impeccable.
Thank you.
But yeah, I moved to New Hampshire in 2000 for college, met my wife there. And other than a detour in the Midwest, been here in Durham. I own property in New Hampshire as far north as Colebrook and a number of different places in between. My first real estate ventures were in Alabama, North Carolina, and Florida. And some of the deal flow in those places where some very nice appreciation was happening, dried up for a time and decided to look, as Kayla said, in my own backyard. Most folks who do the retail level of real estate investing do it the other way. Usually there's this bias of, if you are a mom and pop, side income, little investment sort of thing, most people have the bias of wanting something in 20 minutes so they can drive by and take a look at it, make sure it's still standing, I suppose. I advise people to be a little bit careful about that if what they're really thinking about is an investment, because in your 401k, you don't fly out to see if Apple's corporate headquarters are still standing. If you have a nominal amount of money at play in an investment, you actually really cut into your returns the more gasoline you burn. And that's also true if you're investing out of state. Any flight that you take or Holiday Inn that you stay at to take a look at a property, you're cutting into your returns. So if you're investing in real estate and you're doing it on purpose and you're doing it not just as a hedge of the stock market, but you're doing it to make money, I think that there are a lot of behavioral finance best practices that folks should keep in mind. I am willing to continue to invest in New Hampshire. I have just found it very, very difficult lately. I had a stretch of 6 weeks where I walked away from 5 deals that I was under contract on, 1 in Missouri and 4 in New Hampshire. And I'm an attorney by training. And what we call that decision is efficient breach. So it was efficient for me to breach a contract and to give up the earnest money because it just wasn't a good deal anymore based on certain economic conditions. I'm increasingly investing in technology, not in real estate. There are very few deals nationally that pencil out. So I think it's really important in our conversation, the extent to which we're talking about solving a social problem, making money as business investors, what combination of the two is satisfactory to us. I would love to get to a point where I felt that my forthcoming New Hampshire real estate buying would be in the name of investment, not in the name of charity. But that's where I'm at, unless we have some really amazing synergies or stars aligning here. So, we can perhaps see if those exist among us.
Well, Alex, one of the things obviously that we were looking at is workforce housing here. Because what you see in this room represents probably 1,500 or so employees. And all of them lack a workforce housing that can attract people.
Yes.
And like you said, people are looking for a return on their dollar. Well, if you can't put out X amount of ski lessons, or if you can't fill restaurant seats, or you have to close a restaurant 1 or 2 days a week, that's hurting you in your pocketbook. But if you can provide housing at a cost that is beneficial to you, then it's a win-win for not only the business, it's a win-win for the employee, the employer, and the town, because then we've got a full complement. And this is a town, if you've done any statistics, research on it, statistical research on it, we're growing. And we're growing because of the services that we provide to the tourists that come. And we're relying on tourism, I think, as a major source of revenue for this town. Roughly 70% of our tax base here comes from secondary homeowners. So people have invested in the community. And for that investment, they want to see a service provided, i.e. the mountain, a seasonal, winter and summer program, the restaurants, to go out to eat. They don't want to be, a lot of them don't want to cook when they come. And they want to go out to eat, entertain their friends when they go out to eat. But again, they can't do that unless they've got a full complement of staff. And I think Brian, who's done some research, has indicated there's roughly 300 potential beds needed to service, I think, the existing.
Without any growth, yeah.
And that's not even talking about future hotels and expansions that are coming along. So
I believe it. So my first office, I'm at my home right now. I have an office in town by the university in Durham. I have one that's opening in Littleton, but my first north one was in Conway. And when I closed on that property, it was after having spent 7 months exploring Lincoln, Bartlett, in Conway. I needed a gateway to the North Country of sorts. And in Lincoln, I found exactly what you described, that, for a place that everybody in New Hampshire has heard of and probably visited in some capacity, it's kind of amazing how few year-round residents they are for a place that is so well known. So I would have liked to have been a part of, myself, with an on-site office presence, as employing some more year-round people doing different, traditional business research for me, kind of like office work, because we have such an educated Northern New England community. I think Lincoln absolutely has potential to not just be a 2-season town. I really want to see 4-season success for Lincoln, and it'll take some things. I do think along the lines of attracting and retaining talent. Providing or subsidizing housing has a very exciting potential, because sometimes it's just the gesture. It's not picking up full freight, here's your apartment. There is so much in between providing a house or an apartment and saying, good luck if you can find it, or maybe having in-house HR who supports the housing search in some capacity. There's so much in between. And a little gesture will go a long way. I'm sure everybody in this room can remember a time that we've been shown hospitality by somebody. Maybe we had some sort of a networking lunch or coffee and the other person picked up the tab, and that made us feel kind of special. I'm thinking of somebody who, when I was a producing financial advisor, was recruited away from UBS to join Ameriprise. And this was a very successful person. And he would not stop talking about his free parking spot in Portsmouth. And that was just a part of the package. I mean, this is a very high income earner. But that parking spot, oh, at my last job, I had to pay for the parking spot. Even a financial advisor who worked with high net worth individuals, it wasn't just about the math for him. It was like, oh, well, if I really add up my income and my health insurance and this, how much greener is the grass here? But at a minimum, as a gesture, I think being a partner in the housing for the people who we want to recruit and retain is a big deal. I question how much we want business owners to drift from what they are good at, their bread and butter. So I like Loon a lot. I want the snow made, and I want it to be made very, very well. I know that Loon can do that exceptionally well. Are they good, landlords? Are they good at buying right and financing right on smaller properties? I don't know that they are, and that just might come down to some smaller scale improvements. I know there are some larger tracts of land where there's some development potential. In the interim, I like to pick up base hits where I can. I'm working on a relationship right now in Littleton with one of the major business owners who tells me that the next couple hires that he has to expand his business and take it to the next level are probably going to be earning about $65,000, $70,000 a year in salary. And I think that that's exactly the kind of salary where that person is not going to be a homeowner, but there really aren't apartments or very nice apartments or much choice at all for that person. So I think that if you have a budget to hire somebody for a role and you're going to pay them $70,000, you might be able to get them for 65 and then to have a $250 a month rent credit or something. It might not be creating those additional doors, but it might be participating in a meaningful way that shows some acknowledgement by the employer that that is a shortcoming in their community, or that's something that they just have to ante up. There are other employers in cities where, they'll pay for your public transit. They'll pick up your train fare to commute in. And it's not even that the train fare is the most expensive thing in the world but it's a gesture. It's something they can take care of. So I see a housing subsidy by business owners as something that could be part of an overall employee benefits package, but I also certainly would like to find and create more doors.
Questions for Alex before we move on?
Hey, Alex, the kind of deals you do, you set up, you start with basically empty ground that then buildings are constructed on, and what kind of structure do you use? And like a general partnership with limited partners, or how do you do that?
Yes. And I say that with all seriousness. Yes, because there are certain times when you're working on a business and you need a key component, or you're solving for a problem and you're looking for something. I enjoy as much as possible spending as much of my time looking at. So I like to explore possibilities as opposed to sometimes try to put that square peg in a round hole. There are a lot of people in the home builders community who, first of all, did not see themselves as real estate developers, but they've kind of looked around and said, well, heck, in the absence of other people raising the money or breaking the ground, perhaps my skill set is enough to run a team or collaborate on making something happen. What we're also seeing in the National Association of Home Builders community is how much new construction is build to rent. That is increased very, very significantly. In New England, my favorite thing to do is to work with the housing stock as it is. So in New Hampshire, we have the oldest housing stock in the United States. And rather than working against that, I like to work with that, because if we take a look at some of those 3 units and 4 units in different communities, we know that people are living there because we don't have vacancies, but we know that the housing condition is very poor. We have a lot of folks who have held on for properties for perhaps far too long, who haven't had succession plans. We don't have BlackRock coming in and buying a lot of our smaller properties, which might sound crazy, but I'm invested in Birmingham, Alabama, where BlackRock owns a lot of single family homes as a part of a portfolio. We haven't seen that as much. We don't have out of state moneyed interests from California and New York who own enormous swaths of our already built century old single family homes, duplexes and triplexes. My favorite thing is best described by my 8-year-old daughter. It's always a good practice to ask your children and grandchildren, what do I do? What do you think I do? My 8-year-old daughter says, I rescue houses. And I think that is very, very beautiful. So that's what I most like to do in New England. I want to increase affordable housing, but I want to preserve that which we already have, because a lot of it is quite threatened. We take a look at the condition of some of these roofs, the lack of exterior paint. Some of these things are not cosmetic. Some of these things are energy inefficient. They could be gone altogether. There are a lot of properties that are fully occupied now that if they were in Massachusetts, they would be razed, frankly. And so I think we need to lean into that and take good care of some of that at-risk housing stock that we have in our communities. One of the ways that we can do that in New England is skip tracing the property. Like, a lot of people are used to the notion of like skip tracing if you're a bounty hunter, like, somebody skipped bail or something. But I use an app that if I go to see a house and I see, oh heck, they still have not just Halloween decorations up, but they have last Easter's decorations up. Something's falling by the wayside here. That's a cry for help. I'm not a fix and flipper, but a property like that is probably worth reaching out to the homeowner and seeing if there's an opportunity to come in and do something. So as a business community, that is an opportunity we might want to take a look at. If we identify that 5-unit property in Lincoln, that, gosh, we've been driving by it and there's trash in there all the time. The owner perhaps bought it 20 years ago and they're going to make a nice profit on it. Is there enough of a profit there that they feel good cutting us a good deal on it? And those are 5 more units that are sustained for the community. I think those things could be great. And then if you have turnover in the units and we own them, we can absolutely prioritize our employees and our people going in there. I've spoken with Kayla about LIHTC and some different programs where there's an issue of steering your own employees if you're a participant in developing the property. There are other programs where the idea is just capital influx into the area. So I'm very interested in opportunity zones. The entire town of Lincoln is an opportunity zone. There are some other places around the country where it's not all of the municipality, it's part of it. And it's this census designated place for this reason or that reason. And some of those reasons are because of politics. Some of those reasons are just because, well, they just can't all be picked and choices have to be made. For those people who do have capital gains that they want to make go away, there is not a whole lot of follow through that we need to have on undeveloped land in Lincoln, because you don't need to double the basis through the Federal Opportunity Zone program on such land. If you buy a property that's been occupied in recent memory, you need to double the basis of that property. We have enough deferred maintenance in New Hampshire that is not throwing money at cosmetic appliances. There's real work that we can do there if we buy right. So in New England, it's about leveraging, for me, the 2 or 3 or 4 units at a time. And increasingly, I would like to find opportunities to tastefully add to the density of those lots. And there are some communities that are more receptive to that than others. I'm doing some work in Littleton right now where they're very, very receptive to it. Not a big deal at all for me to add 2 units here, to add 1 unit there. Some places it's almost obvious that what you need to do. You might have some single family homes that have a big dilapidated barn. I'm sorry, those are 2 apartments right there. So those are some of the things that excite me the most about New Hampshire opportunities. When I do work in other places, if it's Texas or Florida, yeah, the larger developments are where it's at there. If you're doing business in Kansas City, the natural housing stock there, they have 12 to 30 brick unit apartments as far as the eye can see. So that's a beautiful space to work in. In New Hampshire, I like to work with what we got.
Really quick, everyone, you guys all familiar with the opportunity zone concept and what that is? Anybody? We all good on that? Okay, I can do want to do a little primer on it real quick?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the idea of opportunity zone, and I know just enough to probably say 80% right, and he'll correct me if I lie. But basically the idea of opportunity zones is it's a federal tax relief program that exists for private entities. And the idea is if you invest your funds into certain areas of the country, right? As Alex said, they drew them on the map for a million different reasons, probably some good, probably some bad. But they pick certain communities or areas and they say, if you invest money in here, it will not be subject to capital gains tax if you hold it in that property for a certain amount of time. It's a really good vehicle for real estate investing. And the fact that Lincoln is one is actually one of the things that sets you guys apart as opportunities on how to bring in private capital that can get a return, not just off the rent money, but can get a return on not having to pay taxes on the capital gains you might have been subject to begin with. So that's my primer.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. The only thing I would say is it's private entities and private individuals. They don't have to be put forth as part of some multi-party fund or as an offshoot of an existing business. You know, John or Joan Smith can do their own opportunity zone projects, and the extent of what you have to file with the IRS to inform them that you're engaged in a project with an eye towards it being a qualified opportunity fund. It's a 2-pager. I complain about long forms. As a business guy, I can't handle them. You know, if it's more than 3 pages, I'm just not going to take advantage of that program, if I'm being honest. But 2 pages you have to fulfill with the IRS. Oversight is pretty minimal. The math of what you have to do to follow through to keep up your end of the bargain is pretty minimal. It's on you as an individual to tie the fact that, oh, I invested $200,000 in this, and I had $200,000 of capital gains incurred by these stock sales or what have you. And yeah, if you have a 10-year holding period on it, your capital gains are totally eliminated. They're at a minimum deferred for all the years that you're engaged in the project. When I was looking at offices as my gateway to the North Country office, I looked at Conway because there was a partial opportunity zone in there. I looked at Bartlett because it was low tax. And I really wanted Lincoln because it's an opportunity zone and low tax relatively. So Lincoln is a very attractive place. It just is not always clear where the land is available. You have so many vacation condos. I don't always drive by and see the kind of properties that are my bread and butter in other places. But, you know, I think we could probably pick up some, figure out some others by way of joint venture. Once you have enough partners on a project, there's no real number as far as the SEC is concerned, but you know, probably once you start getting into like double digits of 10 or 11 partners, at that point, depending on the amount of money that's being raised or being spent, that really isn't a joint venture that is outside of the domain of an investment contract and one that has to be SEC registered. If people's investment in it is not really as an active person jointly venturing, they probably are relying on the lead of other folks. And when there's that kind of a dynamic, that's when you have to file it with the SEC. There are, yeah, absolutely. And there are different kinds of SEC structured investments. There's some where your investors have to be accredited. They need to have a certain income level or a certain amount of net worth outside of their primary residence. If you make the investment opportunity to a lot of people with a lot of advertising, you have to limit it to accredited investors. There's less advertising you can do if you want to make it available to more people. You need to have more of a prior existing relationship with who those investors are. It's more of a know your investor sort of thing. So the more cooks there are in the kitchen, the more likely we will incur some amount of compliance costs by appropriate filing. And there are some things that are in between that are, okay, maybe it's not a mere joint venture, doesn't require SEC filing, but every state has their own securities division. Sometimes there's state filing that's necessary. There are a number of different exemptions. There are Reg D programs. For me, that's fun. That's the fun part. And I know that's what's weird. I really enjoy the contracts part of it and getting that all just right. I actually think that that's the most important part of legal structuring of a deal. It's getting everything like communicated really well in a core document. And I just love contracts so much, which is surprising. It's my hardest class for me in law school, but contracts are not a place to slip in a CYA clause or pull one over on the other side. Contracts can be beautiful communication tools to forge trust, to get projects together, to really delineate, okay, here's your role, here's my role, here's what I'm putting in, here's what you're doing. If so-and-so decides they want out, here are the different procedures for that person to get bought out by the rest. Here's how assignable it is or it isn't. Fleshing that stuff out is really very nice. There are a lot of projects that proceed in New Hampshire without very buttoned down operating agreements. And that's not a good idea. Some people think once lawyers and contracts get involved, that makes things like, I don't know, kind of tense. If you do it right, it's the best possible way to bring people together and to make clear that what you're doing is real. I told Kayla, I always like when I'm working on something, I call it Project X or Operation Moguls or something. It's like, once you really know who's really involved in a project, okay, let's call it a thing for those people who want to come back and see if the thing sticks. And then just start, getting real about what kind of time, treasure, and talent each person has to bring to bear. And that does not have to be even Steven by any means. If you have a 5-person joint venture, absolutely no presumption that's 20% of the money invested or raised by each individual. Different people can pull their weights in different ways. I was talking with Kayla about some of the win-wins that might be available in terms of in-kind work that could be put into a development. So for those of you who have certain landscaping labor, have certain machinery, well, if you're kicking that much in, you maybe don't need to be expected to invest as much in the way of money. And there's nothing saying that you can't have somebody who owns 30% and somebody owns 5%. A lot of different ways to put that thing together. I think if we do a combination on a larger deal, so if we're talking about a deal that's going to require comfortably over $10 million, at that point, we're probably in syndication land. We may be in a position where some of us are general partners. We raise money from limited partners, and then we have bank financing. Those 3 components of where the money comes from.
Alex, we lost part of that, but I'm just gonna pass out something here to a few people who weren't at the last meeting. I passed it out at the last. You mentioned Conway 2 or 3 times in your talk there. And this was a development that was done over in Conway, recently approved. It wasn't done. There was 242 units, and the deal came before to increase density on the parcel. And for that, the town got back, I believe it was for 20 years, there would be 40% of the, they were small units ranging in size from 300 to 1,000 square foot. But there's 242 units over there, and obviously, take 40% of that to affordability is going to be not only for the workforce, but for the people in the town that have grown up in the town and can't afford to live there. I've cited the last meeting 2 examples of people here in town that have approached me about affordability workforce housing. One woman, son and daughter-in-law living in a 1-bedroom, one in their home, the parents' home, want to start a family. They're not going to start a family in that home, but where do they go? They can't find an apartment affordable, and they can't find a single-family home affordable or multi-family. Another one was a gentleman indicated his son was living in the basement because that's what he created. They didn't have a spare room when he moved back home at age 28. So there's a need for affordability tied into a workforce, and I guess the term is synonymous in many, many cases. To some people, you start talking affordable housing, they start giving you, well, it's all low income.
Right, it's all Section 8. Yeah. Most affordable housing in the United States, as defined by Housing and Urban Development, is naturally occurring affordable housing. And one of the things that we also run into as folks who are, seen as resources to our families and our friends and our neighbors, and this is hard. Kayla knows I often struggle to say things like politely, but she allows me to be real. A lot of the people who gripe to us about affordable housing, the percentage of their rent or mortgage as a proportion of their income is not necessarily that high. So affordable housing, when it's reported to us colloquially, is often just another way of somebody saying, stuff's expensive. And like, we always feel like everything's getting more expensive for the most part. So without being insensitive to affordable housing as a problem, we do also have a problem with some basic personal finance and good spending choices. I certainly run into that with a lot of my tenants. I understand there are a number of other social issues involved with spending money on tobacco and alcohol. But what I also point out is some of my tenants that are at the lowest end of their income, not only do they have quite a bit of alcohol in their property, but they have craft beer too. They have that fancy cans of beer that we have so popular around New Hampshire. So there are a lot of people who are upset about the cost of housing, but if you look at what they're paying in rent relative to work, especially if they're working, it's not as bad by that measure. So affordable housing is a huge problem in New Hampshire, but not everybody who complains to us about affordable housing is making opportune choices about their spending. There's a lot of eating out. There are a lot of overall bad personal financial choices that I see in New Hampshire. And some of that's national too. People on Facebook see, oh, I went to high school with that guy and he's going to Disney World, so I can go to Disney World. It's a really bad way to make spending choices.
All right, Bino. Bino, why don't you introduce yourself? I know you represent the business and industrial aspect of the state of New Hampshire. You're Colebrook originally, if I'm not mistaken.
What's that again?
Colebrook.
Yes, I am from Colebrook.
All right, so you've got a good ties to the North Country here.
Sure. So Bino
Look at his name,
Lamontagne.
for crying out loud. I mean, his credentials speak for themselves.
Alex. Bino Lamontagne, I'm with the Department of Business and Economic Affairs. I've worked there for about 16 years in the Division of Economic Development. Prior to that, I was in Colebrook for 30 years. I owned a couple of businesses up there and was a selectman in the town of Colebrook for several years as well. So I've certainly been in your shoes, Jack, and having to deal with some of these issues on occasion. So I guess my contribution to all of this really is just to point out a couple of opportunities. Alex, I'm not sure if you got involved with the Invest New Hampshire program that was responsible for.
I spread the word about it to my competition. I was not one of the 30 projects selected. But I don't begrudge them at all because I did not meet certain prerequisites. I put my best foot forward and I explained that, nope, I have not pulled permits because chicken egg, I'm not going to pull permits unless I know that this is going to be fine. Otherwise, it's not an obvious slam dunk that I would add 1 or 2 or 3 units to this property or that property. But
I see. Well, I'm sorry that you didn't qualify it. The program isn't completely over yet. Governor and council approved half of the money at last week's meeting, and there's still the other half, which is designed to go more towards communities, if you will. So some of that funding, certainly, I believe Lincoln should look to access, if you will. The money flows through our department. It's under a brand new division of housing, which is something we've never had before. And some of you may know the guy who's the director of that program. He's the former town manager for Littleton. His name is Andrew Dorset. So Andrew's the guy to talk with as far as what the plans are for the final $50 million moving forward. He'll have all of those details for you. I believe the money has to be spent, all of it has to be spent along with the rest of the ARPA money that the state got by the end of 2023. So I mention that because besides the 100 million that the governor set aside for housing, there's still a balance of, I believe, approximately $450 million that has yet to be designated at this point. And again, they have till the end of 2023 to spend that money. So stay tuned with the state as far as the Gopher office is concerned. They're the ones who are working directly with the governor to find other means and opportunities to spend the rest of that funding. And I guess the other aspect I did want to mention is the Community Development Finance Authority, the CDFA. They're an agency out of Concord. I sat on their board for 12 years, and we actually did quite a lot of housing projects through the CDFA, and those, most of those funds have to be appropriated to nonprofits, communities, town governments and stuff. So they're another avenue that I would strongly consider for this type of project that you all want to be involved with. Any questions, Jack?
This is something that this is something we had kicked around the last time, the way to go. Is it forming some type of an LLC, but as like Alex said, you don't want 12 partners or 11 partners in there? Or is it partnering with a nonprofit, but then do you control your own destiny? And then are you also under the thumb of the federal agencies, i.e. HUD or other state housing agencies, with what you can and can't do? Obviously, my background, and Bino, Alex does, and I was a housing administrator down in Massachusetts, had 2,000 units of public housing, annual budget of $40 million, 6,000 tenants. And, we were under very restrictive rules and regulations as to what we could do and couldn't do. What we want to do up here, obviously, is make some type of a local preference so that people that work here or live here get a first preference over both the outsiders. And like you said, there's a possibility, Alex, of employers possibly picking up a tab as an incentive for people to work for them. What that rent structure is, who knows at this point in time? We know what the feds use, 30% of the adjusted gross income. But it's something that, the town can do to increase density, provided that, the zoning board would go along with that. There is town-owned land that's been used, Alex, as an industrial park for what Karina, 20-something years now. Jimmy, how many years? 17, 18?
Oh, it was actually in the early 90s, but we really did the site work about 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and only unfortunately 2 businesses exist in that industrial park. I think it has an additional 9 sites there. And so, it's not earning any tax revenue for the town. It's kind of vacant land. And, could we revert to some type of general use where residences, multi-unit buildings would be allowed? I mean, that would take a meeting, an approval at the town meeting to get that done, obviously.
The other thing I would want to look at on that is where I understand that land was originally part of a gift or a bequest. Is that correct?
I believe that it was originally,
What was the question? I didn't catch.
was it? And we have the director of the planning board, Jim Spanos here. Was that was that land originally a bequest or a grant?
Yeah, the bequest.
That was.
Okay. Sometimes when people make gifts or bequests and they have like ties to it, like in the form of like a scholarship or what have you, I thought I might have understood from Kayla, was it donated with the intent or the requirement that it become industrial?
This was the question I had for you guys, was whether or not you were gonna have to do another step to get like a deed restriction removed on it being for particular.
That should not be a problem because there's a legal doctrine called C pre, which pretty much says that donor intent is to be respected. That's the presumption. But for example, if I were to donate $100 million to Mass General for kidney cancer, and all of a sudden kidney cancer were cured next year, it's not that that money is locked up in an account and can't be accessed. Of course, it can go towards breast cancer or something else that is like. So even if there's language or tie-ups with under what circumstances that land was given, it sounds like it was allowed to run course with a lot of, reasonable best efforts, and that the next best thing is perhaps this. So I'm not concerned about that being an issue.
One of the other things too is to partner with some of the individuals or some of the businesses that are currently building and or purchasing, more so purchasing, like you said, Alex, existing sites. Somebody, I believe, just purchased, Mark Bogosian, I think, purchased a motel. And I don't know whether that's going to be for workforce. Is that right, Kim?
I'm not sure of the name.
There was a place in Woodstock.
Yeah.
I heard something to that effect.
And then I think, Murray Clark, I think he purchased the motel. Did he, Brian?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They did, they're gonna do some kind of J1 housing and operate the motel.
Yeah. So, I mean, people are doing it piecemeal. We're looking at potentially a larger scale. How large obviously depends upon finances and site. Alex, did you have, Alex Ray, hello, Alex, did you have any great sites that you had in mind?
You know the town better than I do. I'm sorry.
Well-
That's one of my questions is how any. Oh, down our way, there's a couple of buildings left that are unused and if some of them have to be zone changed to, like we said, or a special exception or variance, but no, I don't know the town. I don't live.
Land that's available. Jim?
So, I mean, a lot of towns, every apartment unit requires 10-15,000 square feet per unit if you build a multifamily, just like a single family home requires a set. But in Lincoln, we changed the zoning ordinance 2021, we call it a restricted multifamily, and it's been classified as business use. And what that allows you to do is you can cover a percentage of the lot, regardless of the number of units. So that allows much greater density in Lincoln.
That is good.
Yeah, and some of the Invest NH money is effectively, I hesitate to call it a bribe to be super facetious, but the idea is that increasing density is rewarded. Like, municipalities will be paid rewards for certain approvals. So there are certain revenue sources, not just by activating things for the tax base of the community, but there are direct funds to be had for doing some of those things. It's also the case some of the piecemeal stuff could actually fund some of the bigger stuff. So, part of the idea of real estate investing, other than some of the tax advantages or people liking it as an appreciating asset class, is the cash flow aspect of it. So, we could acquire a handful of small properties, run them like appropriate businesses, cash flow them, they appreciate, we refinance under lower interest rates. And so, we have a portfolio of housing and we have more money to put into the down payment and the construction of something larger. So, you know, more is more sometimes in terms of creating housing. It's creating that, it's buying that one property or adding that one or two doors. And then there's a bit of a snowball effect. Some people call it like the law of the first deal. Once you do one, you're like, oh, when can I do the second and third? So I think that there are big things that could and should be done in Lincoln, but I also wouldn't hesitate to, be able to point to a net increase in workforce housing in the town, even if that's a nominal number. So, if people in this room, I'm sure you're great people. I don't know if you want to chip in, I'd be glad to pick up a few properties with some of you folks. So it doesn't have to be the enormous decision of doing it all by yourself. If folks are interested in trying out a working relationship and pledging some amount of money, no sacred honor necessary, we could give it a go and we could pick up, 2 or 3 or 4 properties.
Can I add something? I want to sort of stitch some conversation together around this. So I feel like I've heard 3 interesting things on like, all right, like where can you go from here kind of a thing. The first, I'm going to call out Bino and say, Mr. LaMontagne, if the wonderful people in this room wanted to advocate to the state for how that extra $450 million of ARPA is utilized, where would they direct their voices if they wanted to see that go towards housing? Is there a place they should advocate for how the rest of the ARPA funding is spent, Bino, or is that kind of all behind closed doors where they go to their executive counselor? Kind of who's the voice to speak to on that side? Oh, you're on mute.
First of all, it doesn't happen behind closed doors. There are a lot of public meetings that have been held as to, what are the best uses for the ARPA funding is concerned. So, it's gone towards healthcare, it's gone towards businesses, it's gone towards art centers, you name it. It's DES got some money to do some environmental projects, so it's been spread around quite quite openly, if you will. So for the balance, they're going to be public meetings that I know will be scheduled. It's all done through Gopher. I forget what each letter stands for. It's the governor's office for something recovery, but it's Google NewHampshireGopher.com, if you will, and that page explains what they've done, where they are, and where they want to go next. The director, if you will, the final word with Gopher happens to be my commissioner. Taylor Caswell is who heads up Gopher on behalf of the governor, and that's why I say at least for the remaining $50 million, that's where you should be lobbying, if you will, between Taylor Caswell and Andrew Dorset, who's the director at the Division of Housing within our group. Those are the 2 people that should hear what type of project you have in mind and the need for it. And I know they're very well aware of the needs of the Lincoln area. There were a couple of us that were responsible statewide for choosing the opportunity zones that we have. The governor basically told us there were 27 opportunity zones that the state would be granted. And so we went at it and made a list based on need. And, in my case, serving serving the northern three counties, I had the longest list, and I remember the governor at one point making a joke and saying, "You can't have them all be no, they have to be the southern part, central southern part of the state as well." So, but I think we certainly get a good share of the opportunity zones in the northern three counties. So I'm glad about that. And I think the other aspect that I should have mentioned earlier also is the Northern Borders Regional Commission, which has a yearly round of $5.5 million. The next round will be coming up in February, and I was a program manager for the last couple of years, and I started something that I hope they're going to continue. Is we have info sessions in all the 6 counties where they qualified for Northern Borders grants. So probably keep an eye on that. I will certainly let you know, Jack, when that happens, because I've encouraged Lincoln to apply for Northern Borders grants. They have in the past and have received them. So the next round for that, it will be sometime late February, I believe. So keep that bucket of money, if you will, in the back of your minds as well, along with the housing and the Community Development Finance Authority.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So kind of what I was thinking is, I feel like I see this opportunity to sort of like advocate for public money to go to a place that is particularly of need here, right? So that's why I wanted to highlight that. But then the other thing I see Alex talking about here is a greenfield buildup is a slow solution, relatively speaking, right? If you guys have housing, have employee local affordability crunches yesterday, the project that comes online in 18 months, still really important, right? But not sort of, there's a lag time in a greenfield build. It takes a good amount of time to put that together. And so the PC is bringing up about this idea of picking up those smaller site 1, 2, 3 units, trying to then add it to a 4 or a 5. Those things might be, I think of as kind of like an intermediary solution in a way, right? In the way he was just saying of potentially there's a way to do a little bit of stopgap on the loss of local sort of access to housing quicker with some of these smaller projects, just because they're easier to spin around, right? Something that's already built that then could leverage into something. So I just wanted to sort of like tie all of that together to a place to advocate, something to think about, kind of like first steps that can get something going, and then the big picture we have, but recognizing the big picture is the slowest thing to come along, right? That's sort of all I want to say.
And I think that's so true. Brian?
But I
Comments?
don't have anything.
Comments?
I'm still trying to process all this information, get it all down. But there's a lot of good information that's come out of this so far. Sure. Jimmy?
I think, one of the challenges we have in working small is the competition with people who are buying up units and converting them into VRBOs or Airbnbs. And the economics, at least right now, drive the investor towards the vacation rentals, and people are we're losing housing units, at least from what I can tell, in the area because of that. So I'm not sure how we compete with that and then assure that we can turn them into workforce housing.
I think that's the elephant in the room around the small scale stuff, right? Is Lincoln tends to be, I would guess, a community that's got enough demand for that short-term rental market, and honestly enough demand for people wanting to live here, that you probably see a pretty competitive market generally, not alone, just everybody's seen a crazy competitive market recently. One thing I think we've been trying to, I've not seen we actually do this anywhere, but I've talked about this in a couple places, is you guys in the room are the ones who tend to know who's got a house they might be selling, who's got those life things that maybe cause somebody to be selling a home in the near future. And I think honestly, the only way to really find them is to go through the community instead of the real estate listings market, and find the people you might know through your networks who are I'm gonna say some funny things right now, so bear with me, right? But there are certain things that cause people to change their housing situations, like a divorce, somebody passing away. They're not all positive, right? But sometimes even a marriage, right? Creates these changes in where we're living that you tend to know as a community before somebody is like, you know what, we're gonna sell the house. Is start to plant that seed of, hey, would you think about if we could be competitive buying that from you, would you be willing to let us give you a proposal before you threw it on the market, right? It's not gonna get you 100, it's not gonna find you a bunch of stuff, right? But it might find you a couple. The other thing I would love to see a town interested in doing it is honestly putting an ad out in the paper saying, are you community minded? Thinking about selling a home and not quite sure you want it to become a vacation rental place, right? And honestly, just seeing who's out there, who's at home thinking that they've got family members who can't find access to that local housing market, who you might hit a community heartstring, right? A
I'll
piece,
chip in for that ad.
go for it.
Yeah, no, if other people want to chip in on that ad and we share the leads that come from it, I'll pay 50% of that ad cost in your local newspaper.
There you go. But so I think it's that kind of stuff, honestly. It's, you know, it's not straightforward. It's more the grassroots under the sort of open market that you might know about as people who care, people who have something going on that might cause a change to be coming somewhat soon. Those are kind of the pieces, right? As a planner who deals with a lot of community improvement issues, there's a piece, we all like to fix our own problem first, right? If I got an issue going on, my problem really takes precedent. Second to that, the people I care about closest to me, right? Say today they're Jack or Brad. I care about them, right? And they're my sort of second tier priority. And then my third tier priority is community, maybe, right? Is the general people around me. And so you gotta play to that community heartstring, right? Of who do you know, one, in that first reach out. But then two, in that newspaper ad is who's community minded out there thinking about this, who is in a position where they don't need to see that potentially be, you know, every dime they can squeeze out of the property, be willing to make a decent deal with some local folks trying to do it. I don't think it's a perfect thing, but it's the best I've kind of come up with. I'm open to anybody's ideas on it too.
Well, there's definitely some of that that's gone on. I know some units in Mansion Hill sold and converted to work. And that place is suitable for it because you can't rent out for less than a month, so.
Yeah, so there was like another restriction that kind of took some of the competition out of those, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
We've, the town has hired a company called Granicus to monitor short-term rentals. And I think to date, Karina, correct me, we've identified over 600 plus units in town that are done on short-term rentals. So that is a substantial amount, as we've heard, you know, Vino say and Jerry say, that, you know, is taken off the market. Jim?
But a lot of those short-term rentals, they're vacation homes anyway, like the condos, et cetera. I think the bigger issue is the little houses are becoming short-term rentals.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I visited actually somebody I know who lives in the neighborhood back here and had the same conversation about the mill houses, all how quickly they're flipping over and what for.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of that preservation piece, right? Is see who's out there who lives in those houses now, who still has that heartstring root to them. And is probably in a financial place where they're not sort of looking to say, I need every dime out of it. Maybe still bring them to the table, right? But I think it's sort of shaking the trees to just find out what is out there, because that's the way the scattered sites get found.
I do know that we were just told this week that there's a purchase and sale on those 3 lots across the street,
Yeah.
signed purchase and sale.
Yeah.
With
The
the
Lincoln Motel.
Lincoln Motel, the Sunny Nails building and the one next door to the Twin one. So by a local person or somewhat local person buying it.
And, you know, one of the things that someone had mentioned to me was the possibility of, you know, a land lease for X amount of years until build, you know, so there's not an influx of capital going into just the purchase of the land. And, you know, once the building gets up, then, you know, the cost of the land is amortized along with the mortgage over the years. But I mean, that's another possibility. I mean, one of the things that I looked into, there's a parcel of land in town, 300 acres. And it was originally going to be utilized for Campus World. The parcel is still available. The gentleman that had the idea of the Campus World passed away. And I look at it based on what I saw built up in Bethlehem. And Bino, you're probably very familiar with the group from New York, the Hasidic group that owns the units up in Bethlehem on 302.
Yes,
And, you know, they're tiny homes, but they're suitable, and I've been in them multiple times. They're suitable for year-round living. And, you know, they seem to draw a great deal year-round, so there's a constant income stream there. In my mind, I was saying, boy, if we could grab this 300 acres, who knows how much it would cost? But then put, you know, a couple hundred or 100 tiny homes up there that could be utilized for the workforce, as well as when the workforce is not filling them up, utilize them for Airbnbs or for rental out for vacationers. So therefore, there's a constant income stream. That's one of the things we had talked about, was if on the parcel we built like a dormitory style. Well, Lou needs the workers for the most part in the winter time. They leave. Well, OJ Robinson and his group that run Whale's Tail need them in the summertime. So there's never really a downturn in income. I mean, there might be a slight decrease, but there's always an income stream that an investor can rely on. And obviously, Alex, you know, that's what the investor is working. What's my return? What's the basis, the best way to maximize my return?
Most of them are terrible at it. You know, most of them, like, you know, they hear something, but they operate off of, you know, pretty weak news on blogs. Like, one of the cliches that I've heard is like, people say all the time, well, I did my research, and that, you know, doing my research means the first page of Google search results. So a lot of investors are not even very good at maximizing their returns, but, you know, so it goes. That's why I like to focus on more like discrete opportunities, which is like, how much can I get that property for? Like, then drive a hard negotiation. Again, if you're not wed to any one property, if these are not properties that we're going to live in ourselves and raise our families in, you know, that ability to walk away is really very powerful in negotiation. So, yeah, you know, that there may be some prevailing things there that are challenges, but, you know, each property is its own deal, and people are all selling with different levels of urgency or lack thereof. So, I mean, you never know whether that seller might be in a hard spot, whether that seller might think that you're the kind of person who they want to entrust the property in, if the property is going to be related to their reputation for some time. There are a number of reasons why we might be able to land, you know, a few properties here and there. So I like to make a lot of offers and see what sticks and take it from there. It can be a numbers game, but that doesn't mean that it's a cold numbers game. Sometimes it just takes like a lot of skip tracing, a lot of outreach, a lot of marketing, a lot of offers to then land, you know, a handful of properties. So I wouldn't wait too long on having your progress very tangible.
Well, looking at, you know, the cost per square foot today of like a 1,000 square foot unit, I mean, somewhere in between $160,000 and $200,000. I mean, that's, I guess, a general cost. Like I said, when I was looking at the tiny homes, we're talking 400 to 600 square feet at about 50 to 60,000. For the ones in Bethlehem, they were being made initially by the Pennsylvania Dutch and transported out via trucks. Then they started making them in Canada and stopped that when one fell off the truck. And then they started making them on their own. And now they brought the cost down to about $40,000 to $50,000. So, you know, something like that, that's decent and safe and affordable, doesn't have to be expending, significant monies. And again, that's where the investor says, boy, I can make that work at that number and get a good return, maximize my return and make it happen, so.
Let
Jim,
me ask, how many people in these tiny houses sleep up there?
they can sleep, they're 1 and 2 bedroom units with a loft. A loft under New Hampshire law is not counted as a bedroom, as long as it doesn't have a closet. I believe that's correct. Is that correct, Vino?
Yes,
And so consequently, they can sleep a family of 3 or 4,
Okay,
without any problem, 2 adults, 2 kids. And then even putting a smaller one upstairs in the loft, or one that's not gonna fall down the stairs. But we don't need that. But anyways, and they're on 600 square feet, and if anybody goes by them, go in and stop and see them, I encourage that. I was amazed. Like I said, I've taken 3 trips or 4 trips up there now with different people to see them, because as you know, we're involved in the veterans homes over in Woodstock there. And that's what we're building. So,
I just think people who live in there would be more transient as opposed to people that have put down roots in the town, just.
well, that's a good point, Jim. Is it gonna be a home versus just a house? But I think that, when people have a 2-bedroom, they could take pride in it, put a little,
Yeah.
space around themselves, a garden, flowers, et cetera, et cetera. I think it becomes a permanency. And sometimes it's an opportunity for those individuals to save money and move upward and onward. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. And with the veterans housing, we've talked to the VA, I personally have talked with them, and they'll bring counselors over there to talk about budgeting, how to save money, but not to spend money on, not waste your money, how to maximize it. And again, it's an evolution. It's not gonna happen overnight. We know that, but. Dennis, you ready for another project?
No.
Well, I need stuff to happen pretty close to overnight because my kids are expensive now. So I actually have to run and take my son to his soccer practice now, but definitely enjoyed spending time with you fine folks. If some of you there are champing at the bit to take some concrete steps, I got a big mouth, but I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us. Appreciate it. Thank you, kid. Any further questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a question,
Go
probably
ahead.
a comment too. I know that a lot of the businesses in town, or a few in town, that you mentioned Mark Longfellow. He did buy the cabins down the street here at Woodstock for his employees, housing. We're in the process of buying a decent sized property, not big, for employee housing. I'm fortunate that I could share it with 3 projects in town here, so. As it's not for a lack of employees to put people up, and we do need employees. We employ a couple hundred people in town. I know that London Times, you guys bought a property, just bought a property. So my point is, we're each buying different things. You mentioned 300 acres. In a perfect world, I'd love to see the money I'm spending, Jay's spending, Mark is spending, get together in some type of LLC and do a project like that. But there have to be some type of very stringent governance to do that, because Jay and I have never argued with each other, but I can see that might turn into an argument.
People after us, maybe.
I can see that turning into an argument, there's always the HUD project on the street here, there's 2, and they're doing, they have 1 building now. So I saw the footprint, but there's a couple of buildings, they said you want to fund a couple more buildings. And I said, well, how would that work? Because if I fund anything, I gotta put my people in there. They get paid, they have to pay to stay, but I just can't, for the sake of, you hear about the project over there, and I mistakenly brought it up at a contractors meeting the other day at Riverwalk. And they came down on me, well, that's okay, but everybody that's gonna be living there is living in Manchester. And they work in Manchester and live there. I said, seriously? I didn't think that was gonna happen, but it is happening. So how do you keep it local? I mean, it'd have to be some type of governance, not only for the local community, but governance between partners.
Well, that's what I said,
in the
Dennis,
project.
when I said about an LLC or a nonprofit. Nonprofit is more restrictive, particularly when you've got federal dollars in there. You can't say, I'm gonna give the Loon, Lincoln Woodstock residents a preference. You can't do that. It has to be
But that's
open.
not gonna work.
But if you were to form an LLC and, get Alex involved in your own LLC, then you could make it restrictive. You wouldn't be eligible to get certain funds because it's restrictive to the local population. But again, you control your own destiny, you master your own fate in that case there. And that's exactly what you're saying. I heard the same stories. AHEAD is over there, and AHEAD is the nonprofit based in Littleton. They're building the units over there, and they're getting federal funding. So therefore, there is restrictive to what they can put in as the governance or as the rules and regulations.
So my question, not being a lawyer or a banker for that matter. How can you buy this, fund this? We all get along together. There's gotta be a lot of restrictions on that LLC. Or there's gotta be a lot of governance as to how it could work. Let me say it another way. Is there already an LLC sitting out there like that works and that we could look at and say, yeah, let's do the same thing here? I've never seen.
I'm sure that there are.
You started this meeting up by saying we all don't want to be partners, so.
Well-
I'm not sure if you want to be my partner, but
No,
it'd be difficult.
I'm sure that there
Yeah,
are,
difference
and
is-
Kayla probably knows a lot of them. I'm sure Vino knows a lot of them. That, are the models that you can utilize. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to start from
I'd
square
like to
one.
see that. I've never seen it.
Yeah, so what I can add to it is, there's a pretty good local model that just came out pretty recently, which is, it's in the Upper Valley. They created basically what they're calling the Upper Valley Employer Fund. And it's a series, I think they have 5, might be 4 now, but a handful of employers who all were like, we have a serious issue with this affordable housing, workforce housing, same issue, right? There. They were basically, what they did is they took 5 businesses who sort of partnered up different amounts of capital, right? Because different businesses are different scales. And so between some of the big hitters like Dartmouth Hospital, who's putting up a good amount of money, and then King Arthur Bakery is sort of their smallest investor participating. What they ended up doing is you use somebody who knows how to run these as an investment fund and legally structures it that way. And Alex cut out a lot when he was talking through that part, but that is actually what he does know how to do is structure those. When he was talking about how important the contracts are, it was mostly, we didn't hear most of it, but that is like largely what he was speaking to, is how those fit together. The Upper Valley Fund is interesting though, because they took what I call the rising tides approach, right? Where they said, we understand all the restrictions that come along with like the AHEAD projects and the publicly funded housing. But we have a big enough issue here that we just want to put together a big enough pot that you can leverage the 10 million we came up with against 100 million of public money to bring us 300 units. We need not 5, we need a lot, right? And so in that case, but each business had to be okay with making that decision individually. But at the end of the day, Alex and I joke about, you need a really good pie chart that shows how much sweat equity, capital equity people are putting in, what share of benefit that gets you out on the other side, and what happens if you step back at a different point in time. If you wanted to say, sell, does Jay buy you out? Does he have the ability to let somebody else, right? And all of that structure, I agree with you. That's the devil in the details, right? It's easy to nod your head to a concept, but all that
You're
stuff.
saying that that's already there. I'd like to take a look at that structure. I'd like to give that structure to my legal team and say, Dennis, this is good for you, it's not good for you. We're about ready in 14 months, we're gonna open up to another 200,000 square foot building. That's why I'm not sure if I want to do another 200,000 square foot building over here. I need another 40 or 50 employees. So, and I'd like to, you guys have taken off. I'd like to, I'm sure you're gonna have some more needs.
So I know the fund manager of that, and so I can get the formative documents from Deb Flannery at Evernorth, who's the fund manager for them, and circulate those with you. Separately, what I'll do is I'll call Alex afterwards and ask him what he has from other deals he's put together, and be willing to share as examples.
No, Alex, this is the first time I see this. Alex was on the screen.
Yeah, he's a character.
So he's an investor, broker, banker type person, correct? So he puts together deals, but he's not the legal, although I did say he was the lawyer. He's not the legal entity that puts these together.
He is,
He is as
Yeah.
well.
yeah. So he has he's.
So his money's always protected, you know.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So he's playing both sides.
But yeah, so he sort of works with a couple of close partners all the time, right, who he's worked with since I think they're all college friends, honestly, who's doing this, and. One of them is better at finance than Alex actually is. Alex is more of a lawyer by trade, and so between the two of them together and a third partner they kind of have a suite of what the skills are needed. But I mean, absolutely, or you guys would all have to feel comfortable. They're big decisions to make, but I'm happy to get you whatever I can, for example, whether you want to go with them or you just want to take what you can learn from it and keep thinking.
I think it should be for all of us. This is the community that's here. you
Right.
know. We need to share this somehow, because I'm not just looking at me, there's other needs in the community. Alex is sitting behind us over here.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm
Yes.
talking a little to you, but I really speaking to kind of everyone and everyone you guys know who's not in the room right now too, right?
Right. But then it'd be like one big entity and we all have to get, I personally, I do this with the red roofs behind us, but they're my red roofs and I call the shots as we go forward. To work in a partnership with 12 different people is, I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah, and I think, right, and the scale is a big piece to it, right? And so I think one thing I'd sort of suggest out there is if you're interested in some of the smaller scale opportunities or whatnot, think about what you might be interested in the best case scenario, in the worst case scenario. What I wanted to sort of say out there to you all is, if it's okay with you guys, I would love it if you put down email contacts. I think I got some of them, or phone numbers, because if we're all going to circle back up together again, between then, I would love to be able to just call each of you and ask sort of what are your concerns? What's your appetite? Are you here for support or are you here for sort of skin in the game, and get a feel on where people are at? Because it's hard to start spitting that out in a room. But if you guys are willing to trust me with that information quietly, I can start to sort of see how many people really are looking to be a partner, how many people are looking to just help grease the wheels for another group.
Kristen, you've been very quiet. Kristen is an attorney, so she's taking all the notes, Dennis, so be careful. But she also owns a business. She started a Montessori school in Boston. And she fell in love with Lincoln and Loon Mountain. And she wants to be an active part of the community. And so Kristen, go ahead.
My thoughts on many things. I keep hearing everyone shy away from the bigger project solutions, and I don't think people should. I think you should really think about the big solutions. So more about that industrial park piece. And I, as a lawyer, I wouldn't worry that much about restrictive covenants. Lawyers always write things that can be read around, manipulated, and so you just have to do the manipulating. And I agree. I mean, partnerships work if you structure the legal documents ahead of time to make them work. And so in that way, I don't disagree at all with Alex. And I think the community needs, that bigger plan. And I didn't even know about the economic opportunity zone, and it is a big incentive to have zero capital gains on property here 20 years out. And there are a lot of people who have that long-term horizon. So I wouldn't discount that. I would think big. And I don't know yet what my husband and I are definitely like, these are roots and kind of what our role would be. It could either be quarters or precinct
But it's something that I think everybody in this room and those beyond, you know, for various reasons, both parties that are in the industrial park now have indicated they have no problem selling their businesses. One is a logging business, one is a machine shop. Kevin Sullivan was at the last one. Mike Donahue called me and he reached out to me, said, Jack, I wanted to put some housing there. I've got some plans to put housing there. And I said, well, if we're gonna change it, it would have to have some type of deed restriction, that it would be workforce housing, you know, so that you're not gonna get, you know, $2,000 a week rent on doing Airbnbs and things like that. So, I mean, he's well aware of that. Obviously, he's got to return to, you know, to elect on and, you know, make it financially feasible for him to get involved in that. But, you know, he's all for it. You know, he would support it, he said, so.
So that's something, I mean, it seems like a wasted opportunity not to have really pursue that. And deed restrictions and covenants, I mean, there are people who write those every day.
Right.
No, I don't think anyone should be intimidated by that.
That section of town is also designated by the state as an industrial zone. I don't know if Bino knows more about it, but it's for industrial, you know, development, economic development through the state, not federally, for the economic, you know, the economic opportunity zone or the opportunity zone. So I don't know if LLC, if it were to be buy it for commercial workforce housing, could then benefit on additional benefits because of that as well, in addition to the opportunity zone. But I think Vino would know more about that than I would.
What do you say, Vino?
That's actually called an economic revitalization zone. And basically you qualify for tax credits on any money that you put into a project. And the process is very, very simple. It's through our department. And there's a gal named Bridget Beckwith who takes care of all of the ERC applications and reapplications. I think if you speak with Karen, your town manager, she is familiar with that because I did hear from Bridget not that long ago and said that she was wondering who she should be speaking with in Lincoln about one of the ERZs, and I told her to speak with Karen about it. So.
Well, and that's up this year, so we would have to, every 5 years they're reviewed. Ours, Lincoln's is up for 2022, so if we wanted to continue that advantage or take advantage of that, or to continue to take advantage of it, we need to know by the end of the year, so.
That's correct.
Up an advantage.
And
People should jump on that.
you know, that tax, does that release state tax liability, right? Is it business?
Yeah, it's only state. Yeah.
So the opportunity zones is a federal tax, so it's sort of, you actually could get a twofer, yeah.
That's a different, right. The opportunity zones is a complete separate animal. It's a federal program with the IRS. So this is for your state business and enterprise taxes.
All of Route 3 is that as well.
Right, I was just gonna say that, so.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly something worthwhile to redo, I would think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other questions or comments?
I did like your idea worked with our company about a month ago. So wanted to go to Airbnb, they turned to us, so, and they strongly didn't get in the hotel business. But that worked well.
Yeah. You start to find, and I was chatting with a friend who on the other side of town. This is horrible. What are people like? Talk it up in your neighborhood. If anybody's selling, lady down the street, try and encourage her to keep it for a local.
Ironically, they did have somebody string them along for months with Airbnb to go in that direction. Like, it could be VRBO, could be. It's so unfortunate. But I say that, I'm in the post office, so it's like, they're a competitor. Market for we can show. Sure, Airbnb will last long in this community. This is not, I see Airbnb, a family of, 3-4 generations getting together in a big home on the beach, on the ocean, but it's not like that here, it's smaller scale aggregation. Ironically, we all know that Riverwalk has a great facility for amenities and they keep, I'm gonna electrify my fence pretty soon because I jump on the fence all hours of the day and night, so.
I'd be willing to compile a list of contact information for everyone, if that's okay, and then ship it off to you. And
That would be awesome.
you can go from there, and you can then kind of reach out individually and gauge people's temperatures on things.
And I guess the question is, where do we go from here? What's ground zero? Where do we start? Is it identifying property? Is it applying for some grant to get us seed money to get us off the ground? To move to the next phase? Do we start small? Do we start big? Do we go to that industrial park? I mean, all these questions have multiple answers to them. Yes, no, and maybe. That's for me as a select person and for a town resident, that's the big question. What most benefits the town and what will the townsfolk accept? It's not going to impact taxes because we're not looking for any tax break. It's only going to add to the tax rolls, and it's going to supply something that's drastically needed in this town to the locals in many cases who, can't find decent places to live. Other story, they're doubled and tripled up in some of these units. So it's not a great situation. And you start small, look big. You shoot for the moon on the first go around. I mean, like Dennis brings up a very good point, no matter what, documents have to be past the smell test so that everybody's got a fair share in there. Like somebody said, if it depended upon if an LLC is formed, how much people want to put into the pie and see how the pie is going to be divided and what do you get for your investment into the pie. Do you get half the pie? Do you get a slice of the pie? Do you get leftovers? But again, there's all these factors to be considered, so.
I would just throw out there that, the market just turned in a way that helps this problem, right? Because interest rates doubling in a year and a half. You're not gonna have as much of that appetite for the buy and Verbo and Airbnb, so. It's a great time to pull together a bunch of people who are willing to put some money in and don't have to rely on bank financing with rates continuing to go up. And it seems like it's worth, if you say you could for $100,000 even, you threw out the tiny homes at like 50,000, but $100,000, you create 100 units of 10 million. You could probably find 20 people who could structure a deal, putting 500,000 in, getting some, envisioning the return. You'd probably have some of those second homeowners in town who have that kind of ability, as long as there's some return on it that
Right.
they could see getting, and I'm helping my community at the same time, right?
Right, it's that golden ticket of
so-
like, you can help the community, you can write off some of your tax fees, and there'll be a modest return eventually, right? Everyone's looking for that golden goose.
But the whole return could come in that capital gains break, right? That's a huge return
Opportunity
piece
zone,
right
yeah.
there for people. So, Jack, it seems like if that people are willing to sell, coming up with at what, what's their offer, right? At what price are they willing to sell, and then starting to put some specifics around.
I think with an LLC, the cohesion would end when it went from a modest return to a modest loss, then you have friction amongst the members.
Yeah.
That's, what if we had a situation where business wasn't that good, we had 20% vacancy, then you'd have. Right, we're all assuming we're gonna be 100% occupied.
Right, you gotta do a good market study, and that's honestly, that's kind of why I was saying I want to call you guys, because I'm like, my first piece of market study is kind of where you guys are at, right? what scale, like, how many employees do you need housing for realistically? What sort of a interest do you have in a project? Do you have like, another thing I'll probably ask you guys is, do you have like barterable skills, right? Like the kind of part of the beauty of doing something locally is if you've got a property management company and you can say, you know what, I can only put up this much in that right now, but I could guarantee I could management from my crew at this discounted rate, and that discounted amount will count towards my equity in, right? It can be sweat equity too, is sort of what I'm saying. So I think that's the first piece, is trying to figure out what is the interest of the group, right? And how big of a group is going to get cobbled together, because that same piece, the numbers of investors, the amount of interest, and what people's attachment to the project is going to back us into how quickly we can move on the big one, I think, in a lot of ways, right? If who's there, if it's 3 and we're looking at 3 with a total of $150,000 total, well, that's probably not pulling off the big project, right? And so let's know and attack to adjust course that way. But I think that's kind of the starting point. And then absolutely, before anybody starts drawing plans and putting shovels in the ground, a real good market study, just knowing. I think one thing I'll say, as somebody who's watched housing policy and markets around for a good stretch now, having units that are not income restricted is, I think, going to find you with more demand for those units than you see in the publicly funded projects. A lot of the times that we end up thinking that things like the project being built in Woodstock by a head ends up with people who are coming from a little further of a radius to live there, is because of weird mechanics about income qualifying to live in those units, because you can't pay more than 30% of your income for rent, but they don't change the price of that unit for you. So if the unit costs $1,000 a month from the ahead unit, and you make enough that when they pencil out that math, it's 31% of your income, ahead cannot rent to you anymore. Is no longer affordable to you. So there's some weird little mechanics in their rules that make it harder to fill those projects than something that is just open. So, but I think a market study, you really want to look into it so that you don't feel like you're going to build something you then can't fill and would end up worried about losing your shirt. Housing right now is a pretty solid investment, though, if it's at the right scale, because of just how much demand there seems to be for it.
Good point. Good.
So I'm a minority investor in 2 apartment complexes, one in Houston, one in Sioux City, South Dakota, and also a workforce housing project in Oklahoma. And I totally agree with you on the workforce housing units is much more problematic to deal with because of the pre-approvals. And so the average occupancy is like 15% lower in that place than the others, which are always averaging about 98% occupied. So, personally, I'm really interested in the bigger projects here. Funding mechanisms, the structuring, I think are pretty solid. And I also think that in addition to having housing, our school system needs more kids. And we need to bring the people into town. We got a really good school system, but there's so few kids per grade. It may not be able to hold together at the high school level and do a good job for the kids. So we can bring more units and the work's here. So I said, that project, that part of it gets me more excited about being a complete solution for the town. And I also think it would be easier to get the state government on board if we need it. Maybe the industrial, the 7 units in the industrial park, or even all 9 units might be a suitable ground for exciting place for people to live and work and go to school and support our businesses. So, are the 2 businesses there? Are they? Do they own the land now, or do they?
They do.
They do.
They do.
Okay, all right.
They have deed restriction on both of them. I've got copies here. I'll give you. At the end of the meeting. Well, Bino, thank you very much from sunny Florida. It's probably sunnier up here in Lincoln than it is in Florida today. But
Yeah,
thank
it's about
you. thank you for your insight, your information. I did pass out your email to everybody here that I had emails on. Alex, by the way, your email came back to me, returnable. I'm gonna, before you leave, let me get your email. But again, thank everybody for coming. You know, there will be a follow-up meeting when probably when we have some more definitive information. Kayla, thank you as always. Appreciate you getting Alex for us and the insight that you bring to the table. It's been great.
Thanks for
Thank
putting it
you.
together, Jack.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Glad to help.